Welcome back to another episode of the MD Investor. Today's episode, we're going to go through Trump's big, beautiful bill. I decided to do this video because a lot of times, we watch the news and we hear news clips of people pro and con and all this stuff, and we don't really know what does that have to do with me? Like the regular person, what does that have to do with me? So I decided to go through this video to kind of get the highlights, the summary of point by point what's in this bill. So I found this article which I thought was pretty good. Big beautiful bill 101, what you need to know about the new law is written in USA Today by Jim Sargent and Janet Locre or Lorke. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Okay, so let's get to it. So we see here that there's going to be an extension of the 2017 tax cuts, right? This is from Trump's first term in 2016 to 2020, right? The Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. That's going to continue. And this is going to be the biggest item, costing about $3.7 trillion, meaning all those taxes that are not going to be collected because they were set to expire in, I think, 2025. So they were set to expire. So now these are taxes that will not be collected. That's going to cost $3.7 trillion of taxes that's not going to be collected. There's also going to be cut to healthcare and food programs, which is going to save about $1.3 trillion. But let's get into the meat and potatoes of the bill, point by point. There's going to be no tax on tips or overtime wages. So if you are a service worker, you are a waiter, you're a waitress, you are a beautician, you're a barber, people that work in service industry that make a large portion of their income on tips, there's something in it for them. Starting this year, the first $25,000 of tips will be tax deductible through 2028 with $150,000 income limits, or double $300,000 if you're filing jointly. So what does that mean? That means if you are a hairstylist, if you are a waiter, your first $25,000 in tips will be tax deductible, and that's tax deductible until 2028. If your income is $150,000 or less, if you're single, or $300,000 or less if you are married. So you make $150,000. Say if you make, for example, $100,000 and you are a waiter, that first $25,000 of tips is going to be tax deductible. You'll be able to deduct it against your income, so you won't pay tax on that first $25,000. Okay. Jobs considered tipped work are spelled out, such as food service and beautician, like we mentioned. Starting this year, meaning 2025, up to $12,500 of extra overtime pay will be tax deductible, again through 2028, with $150,000 income limit for single people and $300,000 for filing jointly. So what does that mean? If you are working overtime, lots of people work overtime, right? Anything over 40 hours a week, and you're working overtime because you want to get ahead, you want to pay down your debt, or you want to invest some money. Starting this year, up to $12,500 of extra overtime pay will be tax deductible, and that's good until 2028. Well, if you are working overtime and you made the extra, if you're working overtime, that first $12,500 will be deductible. So then now you can begin to make some informed decisions. So if you know that, listen, if I work any more overtime, I'm going to exceed that $12,500, Now that next dollar is going to be not deductible, and you're going to pay a higher tax on that. Maybe you'll say, okay, I've done enough overtime for this year anymore, and it's going to be disadvantageous. I'm not going to get a tax benefit, so maybe I won't do any more overtime this year because I'm close to the limit. So now you can kind of start being smart. Okay, you can kind of start being smart. All right. And again, there's an income limit for 150 single and 300 joint. Speaking of deductions, let's go to the standard deduction. It permanently raises standard deduction to $15,750 for individuals and double $31,500 for married couples and $23,600 for heads of household. That's an increase from previous year. So the standard deduction. So there's two ways to do it. People can either do itemized deduction where you're taking the individual items and deducting them, whatever it is. The standard deduction, which probably benefits most people, the government is saying, listen, if you're single, for the first $15,750 of income, you pay no taxes. We don't want to hear about any details. The first $15,750, you pay no taxes. And again, I know for this, it is federal tax. You pay no federal taxes. The first $15,750 as an individual, you pay no income taxes. And then if you're married, you double that. The first $31,500 if you're married, filing jointly, you pay no federal income taxes. And they raised it from previous year. So that first money below the standard deduction, you pay no taxes, no federal taxes. After 2025, the standard deduction will be adjusted for inflation. So if inflation goes up 3%, they'll raise the standard deduction by 3%. As you already know, inflation makes everything more expensive. Goods and services get more expensive. If the inflation goes up 3%, goods and services goes up by 3%. So it's indexed to inflation. So if inflation go up, they will increase or raise your standard deduction. Okay. Now, if you watch the news, you've been hearing a lot about this salt deduction. When I'm talking about sodium chloride to put in your food, you're talking about, it stands for state and local taxes. SALT, state and local taxes. They have increased the state and local taxes deductions. Let me explain. We pay, your state tax would be, you have your federal taxes and you have your state taxes. Every state tax is different. There's some high tax states like New York, California, New Jersey. These are high tax states. These people pay high amount of taxes on their real estate. Right? You can pay $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year on your real estate. You live in some of these high tax areas. And also your state taxes, right? So your state tax would be, you're paying New York state tax because you live in New York, or California state tax because you live in California. But then your local tax would be like, okay, in California, you live in so-and-so county. That's where you live, and that's where you're paying your real estate taxes. You combine that could be a significant amount of money. So what SALT does is, they say that you are able to deduct your state and local taxes, deducted against your federal income tax. So taxpayers can write off a portion of their state and local taxes, or SALT, from their federal taxes. Okay, so I think this answers the question. All of these deductions we're talking about is deducting. All of these deductions we're talking about is deduction against your federal income tax. So, overtime pay and even taxes or income from tips, those can be, we're talking about deduction from your federal taxes. So taxpayers can write off a portion of their state and local taxes, also from their federal taxes. They have raised the cap from $10,000 to $40,000. So it got quadrupled. They raised the cap from $10,000 to $40,000 and increases 1% annually. So every year, the cap is increased by 1%. The deductions start in 2025. So this year, when we do our taxes in 2026 in April, we're going to be able to deduct state and local taxes from our federal income tax. Deduction starts in 2025 and falls back to 10,000 in 2029. Okay, and a big portion, or a big reason why this was able to get increase and pass through is because I'm sure some of the congressmen, senators from those high cost of living, high tax blue states like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, California, I'm sure a lot of those representatives pushed for that and saying, listen, we're not going to vote for this bill unless this is included. Because our constituents are complaining, saying these taxes are killing us. So that's going to be a big benefit to people who live in those states and pay high property taxes and state taxes. Okay, let's move it on. Deduction. So there's something in there for a lot of different people. There's something in there for people who are paying or financing cars. Okay? So it says here, car buyers could deduct up to $10,000 annually in car loan interest payments if they buy a vehicle assembled in the U.S. So this is a big push for the Trump administration, right? Build in America, buy America, and all this stuff. So if you bought a car, can't be a car you bought like 10 years ago. I think if you bought a car, I believe it is maybe starting in 2025, I believe, and you're paying interest during this time period. I want to say it's about over the next 3 or 4 years. I don't have the exact date in my mind, but you may be able to look that up. Car buyers could deduct up to $10,000 annually in car loan interest payments if they buy a vehicle assembled in the U.S. So you're making the car payments, right? The interest portion could be deducted if the car you bought was I think it has to be made in America or assembled in America. The deduction phases out between $100,000 and $150,000, and between $200,000 and $250,000 if you file jointly. So again, there's income limits, right? There's income limits. So if you make under $100,000, you will probably get the best or the full ability to deduct up to $10,000 in interest, right? So that's a benefit for someone who's buying a new car. That will make them think, should I buy a car, a foreign-made car who was assembled outside of the U.S., or should I buy a car made in the U.S.? So that'll probably incentivize them to buy something made in the U.S. so I can deduct that interest, okay? And that could be significant. All right, let's move it on. Senior tax deduction. Through 2028, each person over 65 can deduct an additional $6,000. So you are a person who, that retirement age, you're over 65, through 2028, you can deduct an additional $6,000. And again, that's deduction against your federal income tax. The deduction begins phasing out at $75,000, right? If you make over $75,000, if you're single, and double that, $150,000 if you file jointly, the deduction begins to phase out. But if you make under that, you can deduct an additional $6,000. All right? So that is great for the seniors. Okay, let's move on. Bigger estate tax exemption. It allows people to pass $15 million tax-free to their heirs. So if you're in that situation, I don't know what it was before, but I guess it's been probably raised to $15 million. You can pass $15 million to your heirs tax-free. Without the change, the almost $14 million exemption would have expired at the end of 2025 and revert to just over $7 million. Okay, so they changed it so it doesn't revert to $7 million. Right? If you're in that class, good for you. Increased child tax credit. It raises the child tax credit from $2,000 to $2,200. Those are for children. You have children under, I believe, age 17. 17 and under, I believe. They raised it from $2,000 to $200. They raised the child tax credit. And a child tax credit is different from a deduction. A deduction is just you can deduct against taxes that you owe. So if you owe $10,000 to the federal government and you get tax deduction of $2,000, now you only owe $8,000. But tax credit, I believe that's money they actually give you. That they'll send you a check. After 2025, it will be adjusted for inflation, meaning they'll raise it. Now this was interesting. I never heard or anything about it. I may have to look into it. Savings account for kids. Children under 8 would receive $1,000 each to open special savings account. They're calling it a Trump account. I've never heard about it, so I have to do a little more digging. Children under 8 would receive $1,000 each to open special savings account. And it says you can make tax-free contributions to account limited to $5,000 annually until the child is 18. So I guess parents can contribute money to this account. The contribution is tax-free. There's a limit of $5,000 annually, and they can do that until the child is 18. So this is a great idea. You know, I have to do a little more digging and see what that's about, but that's a good idea. Savings can be used after the child turns 18. Okay, let's move on. Private school voucher. Up to $5,000 in tax credits to use for education from private schools to homeschooling. Up to $5,000 in tax credits to use for education from private schools to homeschooling. Who's eligible? Families who make less than 3 times their local median income. So if you're eligible and you make less than 3 times the local area median, you can get up to $5,000 in tax credit to use for education. Okay, let's look what areas would get more money from the bill. Defense. You know they're going to spend more on defense. It increases spending by $153 billion. Okay, right? So there's going to be more spending on defense. Let's move on. There's going to be more money for border security. It will increase by $150 billion. Okay, let's move on. Private colleges war chest. Tax applies to school with 3,000 or more tuition-paying students. I guess this is the government or federal government trying to tax some of these colleges. The larger the school's endowment per student, the higher its tax rate on the endowment. Right? Okay. What area would get less money from the bill? Where are there going to be cuts? And this is where you hear in the news and people are kind of upset about it. Cuts to Medicaid. Estimated savings over the next 10 years, $1 trillion from the cuts. But they say there could be some consequences. They said 11.8 million people could lose their health insurance coverage over the next 10 years, right? What they want to do is they want to add on 80-hour. So what they want to do is add on some work requirements. They're going to add on 80-hour per month work requirements for adults without children or disabilities. They say, you're going to have to work at least 80 hours. And there are going to be more frequent eligibility checks to make sure you're eligible. And the program would not fund services at clinics that also perform abortion. And they're going to tighten rules for payments to states. SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, there are going to be some cuts to that or some changes. The savings that over the next 10 years could be up to $30 billion. Again, there's going to be consequences. It requires states to provide funding for food assistance program. Normally, or in the past, I guess the federal government is funding most of it. Now they're saying they require states to provide some of the funding for this SNAP program. It's only going to be provided to permanent legal residents. So illegal immigrants are not going to be able to benefit from this. New work requirements. I thought it said New York. New work requirements for people 55 to 64. So in order to get the food benefits, if you fall in that age, you're going to have to work. And it requires congressional approval to increase the benefits. It exempts Alaska and Hawaii from cost sharing. Green energy rollbacks. It repealed $7,500 tax credits for electric cars on September 30, 2025, along with other rules encouraging Americans to adopt electric cars. So you know the Trump administration, they're against clean energy and so on. So the $7,500 tax credit that people were incentivized, they were getting it to incentivize them to get electric vehicles are now going to be abated or done away with at the end of September. So total cost, $3.3 trillion, and there's going to be wrangling on both the left and the right, but I just want to give you the highlights. So a lot in there for different people. Different people can benefit from different things. Again, the MD investor just trying to increase our financial IQ. So now when we hear stuff in the news, we'll be a little more educated and knowledgeable, okay? Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next one.